All right, hi guys, we're group number 7. We're going to be presenting on the readings about climate change and nuclear energy. The first reading will be Balancing Risks, Nuclear Energy and Climate Change by Robert Socolow and Alexander Glaser. And the second one will come up a little bit later. There's four main points from this reading. Nuclear power could make significant contribution to helping mitigate climate change. Currently, rapid global expansion of nuclear energy is not safe. A world considerably safer for nuclear power could emerge as a co-benefit of the nuclear disarmament process, and the next decade is critical for establishing adequate nuclear technology and governance. And we'll be going more into these shortly now.
Okay, so the first point from this article is about climate change. So they write that human fossil fuel use puts 30 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere yearly, and a possible tax on CO2 at $20 a ton makes nuclear energy more cost efficient and reduces emissions. And then a combination of nuclear power plus other energy sources like wind, solar, etc., can prevent the worst of climate change's effects. And they also noted that a combination of these technologies would bring energy emissions down to about 1/10 that of today's coal plants. And they also said that many developing countries have asked the IAEA for assistance in their nuclear power programs, but work is delayed by economic problems, lack of technical expertise, and a lack of domestic support. And the IAEA estimates that these nations would take about 50 years to implement their first nuclear power plant.
Second point would be hasty expansion. Technology and systems of national governance of the nuclear fuel cycle carry substantial risk of proliferation. The technologies currently used in the nuclear fuel cycle are very similar, actually almost the exact same, as the ones that could be used for a military program for nuclear weapons. It only takes a few kilograms of fissile material to make a nuclear bomb, and reprocessing of plutonium carries the risk of military use or theft by terrorist groups, which creates a hostile environment for nuclear energy to continue expanding because this can be exploited. Nations have competing interests and can use nuclear weapons as an instrument of power to enhance prestige. So that kind of goes off the last point where using these technologies you can easily transfer these technologies from a peaceful program of nuclear energy to a military program that could create nuclear weapons, which enhances the risk of proliferation that supplier groups have been trying to stop and encourage peaceful use of.
The third point is co-benefit. So basically, they say the national security community is seeking disarmament, and the process could influence different technology choices and innovations in the governance of nuclear power. This could include halting spent fuel processing and multinational ownership and control of uranium enrichment facilities. And additionally, developments in the governance of nuclear power could aid in decoupling nuclear power from nuclear weapons and making it a lot safer to develop.
All right, so the fourth point is establishment of the nuclear power program. Nuclear power could have a significant contribution in mitigating climate change. However, there is the need to establish adequate technology and new norms. That means that the entire global world needs to be engaged in order for this to happen. So there needs to be technological expertise in developing countries and proper legislation that would include that would engage the non-weapon states that are usually left out of the supply side decisions, and they would have a more active role in the supplier market. And then if coupling with nuclear weapons continues, the world will not benefit from nuclear power's contribution. So coupling is the most detrimental attribute of nuclear power because the technology used in the fuel cycle and in weapons programs are so similar. It's very easy to take low enriched uranium and use that in the same centrifuges as and convert it into high enriched uranium. And so adopting that once through fuel cycle, as mentioned earlier, would stop the stockpiles of civilian plutonium, which is the biggest problem with nuclear power because there are civilian programs that are producing more plutonium than they would consume.
So from the paper written by Jose Goldenberg, Nuclear Energy in Developing Countries, he basically sorts out the reasons why, um, reasons how nuclear power plants will benefit developing countries, the problem why it's unlikely for the countries to get them, and some steps that should be taken in order to make this happen. The slide is already there. There are some advantages of having nuclear power plants in the country in general. Goldenberg says that nuclear power plants not only generate electricity for the community, but it can also generate the economy as it will increase jobs that can contribute to the plant. Also, it reduces the emission of carbon exhaust that plays a huge role of global warming and climate change. This will be able to compete with traditional fossil fuel power plants and even surpass them, since nuclear power plants have no need to pay the carbon tax on fossil fuels. Moreover, the use of nuclear power plants will be able to establish energy security, as it will reduce or even eliminate fossil fuel dependency for electricity dependency. All these factors sounds amazing to countries, but there is a hurdle that hinders the process to have the nuclear power plants. Um, as um, Technology is the biggest barrier that stops the countries from having them, because um, since there are other countries that have enough resources and money that were able to fund private sectors for the research and eventually obtain it. Also, um, um, to this day, technology is the one big barrier that stops the countries from having proliferation. Um, Countries like the United States, Russia, and the P5 countries have enough resources and money that were able to fund the private sectors for research and eventually obtaining it. Um, in addition, like developing countries will likely want to have this technology because it will make them be brought up to the big table with the great powers. However, these developing countries are unable to do so. Even so, within the developing countries, some do not even need such a nuclear power plant because it will generate more electricity than the country initially uses, wasting all the electricity that's generated and the money for it. So as a result, those that have a strong demand for the power plants and have the capacity to cover the amount of electricity are like Algeria, Belarus, Chile, Egypt, Philippines, Poland, Turkey, and Venezuela, and so on. These countries have a high demand for nuclear power plants, not only because of the Kyoto Protocol to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but because of the demand for the allocation of the resource itself, as it is not easily subsidized by the government. Although the developing countries I have mentioned before have sufficient resources for a cleaner fossil fuel plant and have a cleaner fossil fuel power plant, the average efficiency from that is lower than a nuclear power plant. Luckily, they have the research and the development with today's technology, and that can be improved. That can surpass nuclear power plant, and also there are renewable energy sources. However, all these countries need the sufficient supply of uranium, and the energy security rose to the surface to these countries especially. However, this energy security itself is such a fine line between the technology needed for the nuclear energy and the manufacture for nuclear arms itself. Plus, the enriched uranium is a huge factor when it comes to a power plant itself, and the country cannot depend on other states for long, as they desire for a way to enrich um, as long. So they desire to enrich uranium domestically. This can be driven by other factors due to like political causes or for the need for nuclear weapons, as these infrastructure are also usually seen as proliferation. So the United States usually and does intervene and imposes limitations to those countries. Um, This concern is later relieved due to the NPT in the 1986 with the IAEA safeguarding and overviewing activities in order to avoid proliferation. Since technology cannot be undone, Goldenberg finally addresses that countries shared one, extend key provision to the Strategic Arm Reduction Treaty of 1991, adopt a process for bringing the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, or the CTBT, into effect, adopt an effective fissile missile cutoff treaty, the FMCT, and develop an international system to manage a nuclear fuel cycle that the IAEA controls for both the fuel bank and the enrichment centers, so that it can distribute uranium to the countries that need it. These are addressed in order to distract the developing countries like Venezuela or Poland to view that proliferation is not equivalent, to distract the countries to view that proliferation is equivalent as possession of an actual nuclear weapon. So in the end, Goldenberg does say that proliferation, nuclear power plants do give like a climate change factor. However, this can also be seen as proliferation, so we have to be very careful with these matters. Thank you.